everyone, my name is Guadalupe Vargas and I am presenting on legal issues in counseling. This is a section off of chapter 14 which discusses ethical and legal issues, and you will find this section on pages 439 to 443. The overall message of this section was to emphasize how important it is for counselors to become familiar with the legal system and how it affects them. Listed here are some of the legal situations in which a counselor may find themselves in. For example, when a client's civil rights have been violated, examples of this are age, sex, or racial discrimination cases. The next one is when a client is seeking benefits such as disability or unemployment. The next one is when a client is involved in a custody battle or a divorce battle. The next ones are when you believe that a client will hurt themselves or another individual, or this can also include when you believe that child abuse has occurred. And also when you believe that a client plans to commit a crime. You may receive a court referral, or you may ask to be an expert witness in a case. And lastly, malpractice litigation. You may be subjected to malpractice if there are claims that you caused harm or injury to a client or acted negligently. And before I go on to the next slide, I just want to talk about this interesting fact that's not part of the lesson, it's not in the textbook, but I found it very interesting. The amicus curiae brief, or otherwise known as friend of the court brief. Prior to 1962, psychologists were unable to participate as expert witnesses in court, but that changed in 1962 thanks to the Jenkins versus the United States case. Vincent E. Jenkins committed a sexual assault and wanted to use the insanity plea, but he needed psychological evidence to prove his case. Then in 1962, the American Psychological Association filed the very first front of the court brief that provided evidence that psychologists had the right education and had the right training to assess and diagnose mental illness, which allowed psychologists to be expert witnesses from then on. These are examples of legal disputes. For example, sexual misconduct between a client and a counselor, breach of confidentiality, violation of civil rights, accusations of libel or slander, when a client has committed suicide or there has been an accident on the premises where treatment was occurring, failure to diagnose properly, breach of contract, client abandonment, and a counselor who exerted undue influence. Now, these are the three laws affecting counselors. The first one is civil law, which has to do with malpractice suits. The second one is criminal law, which has to do with expert witnesses. And if you see the picture that I have here on the right, this is a picture of the movie Primal Fear. This movie is about a lawyer who uses a psychologist as an expert witness in a murder trial. Definitely recommend watching that movie. And the last one, mental health, which governs the way client groups must be treated. And again, master the legal system and how it affects you. That includes that you guarantee clients' legal rights. And these include the following: the right to informed consent. That means that the client has the right to receive accurate and clear information regarding the therapeutic process. They also have the right to know about alternative treatment options, the risk and benefits of the treatment that they choose. They also have the right to know the cost and the agreements of their contract. They also have the right to access their own files. They have the right to access your qualifications. They also have the right to know the implications of what it means to receive a diagnosis. The next one is the right to privacy. So this one has to do with confidentiality and privacy. What happens in the session with a counselor stays between the counselor and the client, but also when that confidentiality may be breached. The next one, also in right to privacy, this also includes maintaining records secure. And the next one is the right to protection against harm. So this means that you as a counselor, you do no harm, but also if you know that a client will hurt themselves, then it is your legal obligation to intervene. The right to refuse treatment. There are laws that protect clients against forcible treatment, and if a client refuses to receive treatment, that is their right. However, there are exceptions in cases of emergency or when the injury may be greater. The next one is the right to competent treatment. This means that you as a counselor will abide by the training and the standards of care for your profession, and you do not treat outside of your specialty. You do not use treatments that you are not trained in or that you have not been observed by a qualified expert. These can result in a malpractice suit. So let's talk a little bit about what malpractice is and how we categorize that as. So, for example, the professional relationship between the client and the counselor has to have been established. There has to be evidence that the standard of care was breached and that caused injury or harm to the client. And lastly, that the counselor's behavior is probable cause of the client's injury. Last slide talks about reducing the risk for malpractice suits. The first one is study ethical codes, the state laws and standards of care for your profession. That means that you can use casebooks to help you with decision making. Carry liability insurance. Do not attempt treatment with adequate supervision. This is more applicable to those who are just starting out. Document cases carefully, especially if they have to do with suicidal or homicidal ideations. Consult with medical personnel and or make referrals. There's a really good example in the book. A client is suffering from anxiety and the inability to go to sleep, and the counselor continues the same treatment but sees no improvement. And unfortunately, the client ends up being hospitalized and later diagnosed with a neurological disorder. Unfortunately, the counselor is held responsible for that because they failed to become aware of underlying conditions because they did not refer the client to see a medical doctor. Be alert to signs of fatigue and burnout that will cause you to make mistakes or misinformation. Avoid high-risk situations, and there is a very long list about this. For example, failure to treat a needy client, sexual involvement with a client, breach of confidentiality, failure to warn someone of a potential harm, negligence that leads to suicide, inadequate record keeping, collecting unpaid fees, and failure to diagnose or treat properly. If you feel you have violated an ethical or legal code, get help for yourself. It's also important that you educate yourself and improve your competence so you can be more prepared for these situations. Additionally, if you are to appear in court, seek the legal help, and that will help you to prepare for court appearances and depositions. And that concludes section of legal issues and counseling. Thank you.